Michael B. Jordan and his longtime friend Malcolm had just wrapped up a long day in downtown Los Angeles, bouncing between a few business meetings and a low-key charity event, and they ended up deciding to grab a quiet dinner together. Something simple but satisfying, nothing flashy or loud, just good food and a little space to unwind without thinking too much about who might be watching. So they found themselves at this mid-range Italian place near Culver City, not the kind of spot where people usually did double takes, and that was exactly why Michael liked it. It was normal, it was calm, and it didn't feel like a photo op. Just a place where he could eat and talk like anyone else. So they sat in a booth near the back, ordered a bottle of red, and started catching up in the kind of relaxed rhythm that only comes from years of friendship. And it felt easy, like time was folding in on itself. Both of them laughing about old high school stories, breaking down the new Creed script, roasting each other in that casual, loving way men do when the trust runs deep, and even the server, a younger Latina woman named Angela, according to her name tag, seemed to pick up on the chill vibe and checked on them just enough, offering a warm smile each time she swung by, never overstepping, never rushing them, and by the time the check was finally mentioned, Michael looked at his watch and realized 2 hours had passed like nothing, and they both agreed they'd skip dessert but wanted to make sure to leave her a solid tip, because good service always deserved that. So they waved her down politely, and Michael leaned slightly forward with that natural charm of his, asking for the check in a voice soft enough that the surrounding tables didn't even notice. And Angela smiled again, nodded, and turned to walk toward the register, and everything still felt light, unremarkable in the best kind of way. The way normalcy sometimes sneaks up on you when you're not looking for it. And for a brief moment, one of those quiet, easily forgotten moments, Michael thought about how rare and necessary nights like these were, just sitting across from someone who knew you before all the noise, and just as quickly that thought was broken when they noticed that instead of Angela, a different server, someone neither of them had seen the entire night, started walking toward their table with an expression that didn't quite match the tone of the evening, her body language stiff, like she'd been sent in against her will or with some strange purpose. And Malcolm leaned slightly toward Michael, instinctively picking up on the shift, his laugh fading mid-sentence as both of them straightened in their seats, and something subtle but heavy hung in the air, like the pause before a dropped glass shatters on tile, and Michael didn't say anything yet, didn't even glance too directly at the new server, but there was something in the way her hands were tight around the edge of the small black bill folder, the way she seemed to avoid looking directly at them as she stopped short of their table and stood there silently for a second too long. And in that silence, something shifted that couldn't be undone. A tremor neither of them could fully name yet, but both could feel in their chest, and though no words had been exchanged, Malcolm's face had already darkened slightly, not with anger exactly, but with an alertness born of long experience, and Michael, still holding his wine glass loosely by the stem, set it down with deliberate calm, sensing the turn, not yet knowing how far it would go, but already aware they weren't leaving this restaurant with the same quiet energy they'd walked in with. Not tonight, not after whatever was about to come next. Because there are moments when you realize a situation is about to reveal more about the world and yourself than you were ready for, and this, whether they liked it or not, was one of those moments, the kind you can't plan for. The kind that presses on your chest long after it's passed, and though neither of them could quite name it yet, something told them both. Wait, the story's just starting. But instead of setting the check down with the same professionalism Angela had shown all evening, the new waitress, a pale woman in her mid-30s with tense eyes and a twitch of discomfort in her jaw, stood motionless for a beat too long, gripping the edge of the tray with a stiffness that was impossible to miss. And Michael, trying to keep things level, offered her a polite thank you, even though no words had come from her yet, but instead of responding in kind, she blinked once, then looked directly at both of them, her voice low but firm, like she had been preparing the sentence all the way from the back of the kitchen, and said almost without blinking, "I'm not serving you." And before either of them could register the tone, she added flatly, "I don't serve people like you." And for a split second, Michael thought he must have misheard her, because she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't snarled or cursed or made a scene, she'd just dropped the words there like cold metal on tile, and Malcolm sat up straighter in his seat, his expression blank, lips parted as if about to ask for clarification, but Michael was faster. Not louder, not aggressive, just stunned in that still way a person becomes when something deeply wrong happens in a space that had moments ago felt safe. And he asked slowly and clearly, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And the waitress, barely hesitating, repeated it with the same strange conviction, her hand trembling just slightly now. "I'm not going to serve you, because you're black." And then silence rushed into the space between them, thick and disorienting, like someone had yanked the air out of the room. And for a second, no one moved. Not Michael, not Malcolm, not the nearby diners who had started to notice something off at their table, but weren't close enough to catch the exact words, and Michael leaned back in his seat, one hand under the table, gripping his thigh so hard his fingertips hurt. And Malcolm, blinking twice, finally let out a short breath and asked, quieter than before, "Are you serious right now?" And the woman, either emboldened or flustered, didn't answer directly, but took a single step back and said, "If you have a problem, I can call security." Like that solved something. Like that would be the end of it. And for a long moment, neither Michael nor Malcolm said anything. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because there were too many options, too many versions of this they had both imagined or feared or lived through in smaller ways, and it was happening here, again, in a place that didn't seem like the kind of place that allowed this kind of thing to live. But here it was, raw and absurd, and Michael finally said, clearly, not looking around, not raising his voice, "You're a server in this restaurant, and you just admitted that you won't serve us because of our skin color." And the waitress, her eyes darting toward the kitchen now, nodded almost imperceptibly, like she regretted it but didn't want to back down, and Malcolm laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous, and he was trying not to let his hands shake, and said, "So what now? You're just allowed to be racist on the job? This place let you walk around like that?" And Michael nodded, quiet but furious, and said, "Then call someone else, because you're not fit to be doing this." But the woman didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't flinch. She just said again, "I'm calling security," and turned abruptly, marching off in the direction of the hostess stand, her body tight with something ugly and self-righteous. And for a few moments Michael and Malcolm just sat there, still stunned, surrounded by the soft murmur of the restaurant returning to life, people pretending not to stare, eyes flicking up from their plates and back down again, and somewhere in the kitchen they could see Angela through the swinging door, her brow furrowed, mouth opening like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite leave her station. And Michael looked at Malcolm and said low, "We didn't raise our voices, didn't do anything." And Malcolm nodded, "I know." And they both sat up straighter, bracing themselves, because there's a certain posture black men learn to adopt when security is coming, a kind of preemptive control, a way to avoid being seen as a threat, even when they're the ones being threatened. And when the two security guards finally arrived, both white, one older, one younger, both scanning the room like they already had a story in mind, the waitress met them halfway and began speaking quickly, animatedly, gesturing toward their table as if something dangerous had happened. And Michael could feel his hands curling into loose fists under the table, but didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. And when the guards finally reached them, the younger one started with, "Is there a problem here?" And Michael replied calmly, "Yes, but not with us." And Malcolm added, "That woman just told us she won't serve black people." And for a second, neither of the guards said anything, and the older one looked between them and the waitress, who had stopped a few feet away now, arms crossed, expression tight. And it was in that moment, that long pause where justice or complicity gets quietly chosen, that the restaurant manager appeared from the back, a thin woman in her 40s with reading glasses and a clipboard, her eyes scanning the situation like she'd just walked into a bomb mid-tick, and Michael locked eyes with her and said, "Ask your staff what just happened." And the manager didn't say anything, just turned to the waitress and quietly pulled her aside, and the conversation was hushed, rushed, the manager's brows rising and falling as the waitress tried to explain something in a flurry of defensive gestures. And then, without warning, the manager called one of the security guards over, whispered something to him, and motioned toward the kitchen, and the guard nodded, then turned to Michael and Malcolm and said, "We're sorry, someone else will take care of you." And just like that, the waitress was gone, ushered off through the back in a quiet storm of awkward apologies and eyes that wouldn't meet theirs, and a different server came over, someone who looked unsure but professional, and simply asked if they still needed the check, and Michael and Malcolm, both still upright, still silent, said yes. And the night went on, sort of. But not really, because something had cracked open in the quiet middle of that restaurant, and it would take more than a check and a tip line to close it again. And even as they left later, walking out into the cool night air without saying much, letting the weight of what happened settle in their limbs, there was a sense that this wouldn't be the last time this story got told, not because they wanted to make noise or cause a stir, but because some stories refuse to end when the receipt is printed. Some stories stretch out across nights and headlines and rooms full of people who think silence means safety. And this was one of those, and it wasn't over, not yet. When the security guards finally approached their table, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The way a sudden storm seems to freeze everything just before the first raindrop falls, and Michael and Malcolm both sat up straight, eyes steady but guarded, as the younger guard, a tall man with a clipped haircut, looked at them and asked calmly, "What happened here?" Michael exchanged a quick glance with Malcolm before responding, his voice measured but firm. "That server refused to serve us because of our skin color." And the guard's eyes flicked to the woman who had caused the scene, now standing a few feet away, with her arms crossed and a face that looked part defiant, part regretful, and the older guard stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he addressed her directly. "Is this true?" And she hesitated, then nodded curtly, explaining her version in a rush, words tumbling out, defensive and uneasy, about discomfort and personal beliefs, never quite fully owning the weight of what she'd done, but unable to deny the facts. And the security team listened quietly, exchanging glances between themselves and the restaurant manager who had just arrived, her presence commanding without shouting as she motioned discreetly for the racist waitress to step aside, the woman reluctantly following, casting a last glance toward Michael and Malcolm that seemed to carry a mix of anger and something like shame. And with that, one of the guards called over Angela, the first server who had waited on them earlier, a visible contrast to the woman being escorted away, and Angela approached with a calm professionalism that seemed to soften the sharp edges of the situation, quietly asking if Michael and Malcolm still wanted to finish their meal, or if there was anything else they needed, and both men nodded, signaling they just wanted to settle up, to put this behind them if only for the night. And the atmosphere shifted, tension easing just enough for the normal sounds of the restaurant, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, to come back into focus, though the invisible weight of what had just happened lingered in the corner of every glance, the memory of words spoken that should never have been said. And as Michael reached for his wallet, Malcolm caught his eye and they shared a brief, wordless moment of understanding that this wasn't the end, but a complicated chapter, one they'd have to carry forward in some way. And when they finally left, stepping out into the cool air of the evening, the city lights seemed a little sharper, the night a little quieter, as if holding its breath along with them. And the next day, determined not to let the experience fester in silence, they returned to the restaurant, not for confrontation,